All right, let's just get a grasp now on Lessee Accounting. Now, as I told you, you really need to know in an exam, when reading the question, for example, the question would require you to deal with the lessee or with the lessor. So read the question and know, oh, I have to deal with the lessee. If you need to deal with the lessee, no issue, no need to know whether it's a finance lease or an operating lease. If the question requires you to deal with the lessor, you need to distinguish between an operating lease and a finance lease. So you really need to know how to deal and break down your question so that you know how to be specific, right? Okay. For example, here the basic principle: at the commencement of the lease, just at the initial point of the lease, IFRS 16 requires that the lessee recognizes the lease liability and the right of use asset. We have spoken of this several times. We have even shown the double entry for that. Yeah, they just speak of the conceptual framework. No, this is not big deal. The conceptual framework does not override the standard. So it's just a reminder. They just try to define the meaning of an asset, but it's no big deal. All you need to know actually, even if something from the standard goes against the conceptual framework, that's none of your business. You need to go with the standard. So it's no big issue, no big deal. Yeah. Let's just proceed on initial measurement. Now, on initial measurement, as I just told you, debit.
Sorry, Fred.
Yes.
Fred.
Yes.
Sorry, we didn't go through the conceptual framework to see if there is a departure from the standards.
If there is what?
A departure from the standards.
Yeah, that okay. You're just trying to mean from the definition. Is that what we're just trying to say? Hello?
Hello? Is there any difference between the opinion of the conceptual framework from the standard itself?
Not that much, because actually everything cannot just be the same as it is seen, but actually the main concept. If you do remember, when we're just trying to define that the word control on the lease, I just said that even in the conceptual framework, if you remember, I said even in the conceptual framework, they usually say that you control something if you can direct use and they prevent others from enjoying those benefits. That's why, for example, here they just define the asset for conceptual framework. An asset is an economic resource that, as a result of past event, is controlled by an entity, or is an economic resource controlled by an entity as a result of a past event. Actually, they skip a lot here because you need to define what an economic resource is, something like that. Economic resource is just the potential to produce economic benefits. Now, as for lease, we said debit right of use asset and a credit lease liability. Now that right of use asset is an asset they are trying to compare with the definition in the conceptual framework. The right of use asset here. The right of use asset meets the definition because now why does it meet the definition? Because the lessee determines how the asset is used during the lease term. That's why we say the lessee can direct use. They just need to say that. The conceptual framework says that you control if you can direct use. And here the lessee can direct use. And this use will generate economic benefits for the lessee. So the lessor is unable to use the asset during this period. But as I said, even if the definition in the standard differs from the definition in the conceptual framework, do not say that it is wrong. No. The conceptual framework is just an aid. It is just there to aid when you are stuck with something, but not to go against the standard. For example, if you deal with IS 12, that is income taxes, you find something called deferred tax, maybe deferred tax liability. Something deferred is something related to the future, but you cannot, in the conceptual framework, you cannot recognize something, an asset or a liability relating to the future. We only record if it is related to the past. But actually, we do not care on whether they are departing from the conceptual framework or not. So it's just the way they are just like, but actually here it's not that important, right? You get me?
Okay, let's proceed.
All right. But also here, speaking of the concept of framework, we said that we debit the right of use asset and also we credit the lease liability. Now, if you go to the liability, we just decided to go back to the concept of framework and take a look at the liability. A liability is a present obligation. It's obviously an obligation arising from a past event to transfer economic resource. Actually, to transfer the asset, because if you have a liability, you need to transfer something, and obviously that one could constitute an asset. Now, if you speak of the term lease liability, it means that you have to make payments to someone who has given you the asset. So a lease liability meets the definition because the lessee has an obligation to transfer consideration, let's say rent each period, to the lessor once the asset has been made available. And consideration normally in the form of cash is an economic resource, not just in cash. Normally they say in cash, but whether it's a consideration that you can for which you can determine the value, just says the consideration, right? So that you shouldn't bother you much. All right, now let's go to initial measurement. Right now, we already know that you have to debit right of use asset, but also you have to credit, right? You have to credit lease liability. Now, we need to know at what amount should we recognize them? At what amount? Because if you say initial measurement, we also speak of initial recognition. If you need to recognize something initially, you really need to know its value. To know its value is to measure its value. That's why initial measurement goes hand in hand with initial recognition. So the liability we are given concepts here. Now listen, in the exams, the most common issues are always these fixed payments. You have entered into a lease agreement, you'll be paying $1,000 at the end of each year for 5 years, it's over. But now, since you are studying, you have to know all possibilities so that in case you encounter them on an exam, you can just go very well, right? Okay. So we say the lease liability is initially measured. Oh, hey, hello. It's less now, it's less than a minute and it will be over. So let it be over and then you join back and then you go about these initial measurements. After doing this, I think you should be fine. Tomorrow it will be very easy to proceed. So at least you have to use just 40 minutes to go through these initial measurements on the lease, on the liability, and the asset, and then other matters can easily be